Welcome to Doc NYC's 2024 Spring Showcase, or mid-year celebration of documentary films and series. I am Ruth Somalo, Senior Feature Programmer at Doc NYC, and it's my great pleasure to be speaking today with director Gotham Chopra, who will tell us everything we want to know about the four-part docuseries Thank You, Goodnight, the Bon Jovi story, brought to us by Hulu. Hello, Gotham. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk about this.
So Gotham, you're best known for your sports films, maybe like through your company, Religion of Sports, that have done like incredible work with athletes like LeBron James and Kobe Bryant, and just great people. What brought you to John Bon Jovi?
Well, John brought me to this project. Actually, John is a huge sports fan. We happen to also share a real passion for the New England Patriots and have been fans for a long time. So he had seen something I had done with Tom Brady, and Tom's a co-founder of the company, so we've done a lot of stuff together. So yeah, it's a little over 2 years ago. He approached me and he said, I saw this thing you did, and that series chronicled Tom's success over 20 plus years playing football. And John said, Tom's got 20 years, but I've got about 40 almost. It was year 39, I think, at the time. And he said, I want to tell our story. We've never really done that definitive look back at the 40-year story. Would you be interested? And I was like, yes, of course, 100%, I'm in. And he said, oh, but your company's called Religion of Sports. And I said, don't worry about it. I'll figure that out. But that's really how it started. And John, as he has for many years throughout his career, had a vision. And that's, was the sort of spark for the project.
Is it okay if I ask you about your little adventure as a roadie with Michael Jackson, and even like helping him write some lyrics at some point in your career after you wrote your first book?
Yeah, it's going way back. So, I met Michael when I was quite young. He was working with my father. And, over time, over a couple of years, I grew close to him, became friends with him. And then when I was about 17 years old, I think, he was going, I'm going to age myself, but I think it was the summer of 1992. He was doing the Dangerous tour in Europe. And he asked me if I wanted to go. Just to accompany him. And look, Michael's had obviously, complicated history and stuff like that. So, but at the time, none of that really was talked about or anything. So I went on the road with him. And for a week, it was great. I loved it. It was like Wembley Stadium and sold out stadiums. But then, what used to happen is Michael would go back to like the Dorchester Hotel where he would stay in the penthouse, and there'd be hundreds, maybe thousands of fans lining up outside chanting his name. And Michael used to sit upstairs drinking orange juice and watching My Fair Lady. And I was 17 years old and I was like, this is really boring. I don't want to do this for the whole summer. So I asked for a job. Michael and the tour arranged for a job for me. So then I spent the next 7 weeks just on tour. And, I had this job where every city they needed a choir, like a children's choir, to perform Heal the World and one of the other songs, Will You Be There? And I was responsible for finding that choir, getting them there, going through the sound check, etc. And then they would perform and go. And so it was amazing. I mean, it's the best job I've ever had. Wasn't really in the job. But I learned a lot. I obviously got to be around Michael and that whole crazy show. And then I grew closer to him over the years. And then while I was at Columbia University in New York, I started kind of working with him a little bit, just very informally. He used to live at the top of the Four Seasons. And so I used to go down there. I think he was starting to produce the History album at that point. And yeah, there was some sort of informal collaboration that, was, again, just, meaningful. When I think of like now, like the sort of takeaway from all of that was working with somebody so talented, so iconic, so complicated, and that's a whole different conversation. And I should say, like, my experience with Michael was amazing and collaborative and creative, and healthy and all of that. But what I took away with it was I sort of gained a comfort for working with somebody that creative, complicated, iconic, and that has certainly paid itself forward. So when I have the incredible fortune of meeting someone like John Bon Jovi and starting to collaborate, I wouldn't say I'm inspired, but not necessarily intimidated. And that's been, really helpful as you start to build these relationships and, get into areas that aren't always going to be easy, because the point of these docs, as you know, is, to go places that can sometimes, require vulnerability and discomfort.
And there is like, so you have this great experience like within the music world and touring, of course you come from like the highest pedigree of transcendental, spiritual background. And you have this very great understanding and love for, the rigor and of sports and the complexities of like high level sports. So all of those things are also part of John Bon Jovi's approach to music and career. So something I really, really liked about the series is how it's a very, because he's such a grown up in a way, there's this very, beautiful, peaceful, sober look at the work of an artist, a musician, and how much it really takes to be at the highest of the possible levels of performance. And that's like where the big tension comes in, after 40 years of legacy, am I, Bon Jovi at the top of my game to be able to maintain this really high standard that I have for myself or not? So can you tell us a little bit about, thinking about these issues in the overarching way of structuring the series?
Yeah, I think that, I approach that was very well said, and I'm grateful. Thank you for saying that and describing it that way, because that was definitely the intent. I think I look at everything, and obviously it's a product of, my upbringing, and the world I've been around, but I look at everything through the prism of a sort of spiritual lens in some ways. And, John, and going back to like what you described or how you opened the conversation about my background in sports, even that, I love sports, et cetera, but I look at sports as something sort of mythic. Sports is ultimately about human potential, and can I be the best version of myself, physically. But in order to perform at the highest level physically, and we've seen this now play out in front of us, you have to be mentally dialed in, emotionally dialed in, and really spiritual. I mean, the people I've had the good fortune of working with, the Kobe's, the LeBrons, Simone Biles, Serena Williams, etc., like they're at their best when they are, all those elements are unified. It's not just about being physically able to do the right thing at the right time. It's about, just being totally present. And that is, again, something that is, you see it with John, somebody, he was going through a physical injury during this film, and that's sort of an evolution of something I started to observe while I was working with him, and I wanted to document it. But when you go back and you look at, like, it's all the same qualities of, that relentless work ethic. It's that discipline, devotion to craft. Yeah, of course, John's talented, but there's a lot of talented people. It was that relentlessness and that unwillingness to take no for an answer early in his career, really at all stages of his career. And to me, those are all deeply spiritual qualities, devotion to craft, obsession around process, and so, those are the things that we decided to really emphasize and look at. The music is incredible. The archive is just crazy. The relationships, I mean, it's rock and roll. It's sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And it's very much present, especially in the 80s and the 90s as the band sort of exploded. But underneath that is, and it's not just John, it's, Tico Torres, like the drummer, is like one of the most sort of spiritually grounded people I've ever been around. And so it was really fun to explore those themes. And that takes time. That takes, it took 2 years. And that was, and everything was perfect. Like from that first breakfast I had with John, where he said, "Do you want to be part of this?" And I said, yes. We were off and running. And yet still, it takes 2 years to really build the relationships and find a way to communicate it, I think, in an authentic way.
We'll go back to the archives and a couple other things that you mentioned, but talk to us a little bit about the decision to build the narrative around the two timelines, like the first one starting from childhood, all the way until the second timeline, where we pick them up in 2022 and go over like a year or 2 years of like just this new process of the band playing together.
Well, I'd say, at the risk of, I hate the word, but it feels pretty accurate. It's a formula, and it's something I've done in the past, which is, again, going back to the sports docs, is following an athlete across the season or maybe coming back from an injury or something that's happening in real time. And at the same time, then going back and saying, okay, well, this person that I'm getting you invested in emotionally and what's going to happen, I need to tell you the backstory. Who are they? Where did they come from? How did they get to this place? So that's sort of been the formula. And so I will say, when John first approached me, it was very much like the band's it was year 39, and the band's going to be, turning 40 in about a year. We've never done the look back. It's an amazing story. We've collected all this archive, et cetera. Do you want to do it? And I said, yes. But that was a retrospective. I was always already looking like, okay, well, but what's the thing? Like, is there a new album? Is there a tour? Like, what's going to happen in year 40? And then it just was so obvious right in front of me. It's like, oh wait, there's something going on with the voice. Like, what's that? And then, he was open and said, well, I've been dealing with this injury, and I'm going to go out. It was February, like I said, I think of 2022 when we had this breakfast. They said, well, I'm going to go on tour in April for 15 dates, and smaller arenas in Omaha and Indianapolis and all these places. I'm going to see if I can still do it, because I don't know if I can. I've been struggling. And so I'm starting rehearsals in March, and then we'll go out. And he was like, but don't worry about that. And I was like, no. That's the thing that I need to, like, because, from a storytelling perspective, it's like, oh, now there's stakes. This 40-year thing that you've built across time hangs in the balance. Like, we were in year 39. Was he even going to get to year 40 on stage and produce an album and all of that? And that's storytelling. I mean, that's like, well, now we have to follow that, because now I care more about the 40 years. And so he was a little hesitant at first, but I said, it's a process. It's not like we're filming and putting this out on Instagram tomorrow. Let's just do it and, like, kind of see what it is and feel it out and feel each other out and stuff like that. And, he was game for it. So, I was lucky that way.
I mean, that absolutely makes the whole series, so special, because you really, like, there is those very vulnerable moments, like when after the first show, like, he's lying in the dirty carpet of his dressing room in Omaha, thinking like, oh my God, it was terrible. And then the social media picking up on that, the next day. And like, how were the conversations once that was, filmed and brought into the series? How were the conversations with him about that? Like how to approach being so vulnerable?
I think John, he was very trusting of me. And I honestly, we didn't talk too much about it. I mean, try to, as a filmmaker, create an environment that's intimate and trusting. So it's not like there's tons of, like, he can just be himself, do his thing. And he was very focused on that, his process and figuring out, if he could do this, and his healing and just all the work that goes into those performances, etc. So he wasn't particularly, I just said, just be yourself. Again, the sort of classic fly on the wall. And then we'll see down the line, like, if it's usable, if you're comfortable with it, et cetera, et cetera. And so he's very trusting. I'm not sure that we ever had, like, the most direct conversation early on about, like, well, who's got creative control and final cut, because in some ways that was always, I think John's very smart and he's an artist, and he kind of knew early on that, if we're going to do this and if it's going to be any good, then it has to be honest and it has to be authentic, and otherwise, why do it? And so he gave me that freedom, and I'd say that wasn't the challenge. The challenge was later, it's a band. So, we're talking a lot about John, but the story is about Bon Jovi, the band, and the band has 5 founding members, and, then over time more, and, there's so many different perspectives, and you're talking about 40 years of history framed through the lens of a lot of emotion and a lot of ups and downs and stuff like that. So trying to navigate that was sort of the greater challenge. But John wasn't, he was pretty straightforward and easy.
Well, let's chat briefly about the archive, because I absolutely love that you opened the series with the basement. and like
Yeah.
that incredible shot of like all the VHS tapes and all the audio tapes that he's cataloging for the future, and like all that analog, technology that a lot of the young viewers don't even
Yeah.
know what it is.
Yep.
Uh, so, because in a sense, you get the materiality of it, the accumulation of it, all the years of these incredible experiences that are contained in these tapes. Can you tell us a little bit about, the incredible gift of working with this amazing archive?
I mean, it's a dream for a filmmaker, for a documentarian. My team. It was, I think, two things. One, John and the band did an incredible job. I mean, just very like forward thinking in terms of capturing, documenting, um, collecting all sorts of archive over the years. I think, and then John started to get organized, or it started to organize it when he had that surgery. I think so. That would have been the summer of 2022. He really couldn't do anything. They told him like because there was like a chip that was or a little thing that was implanted, so he couldn't. They told him you can't even physically move too much, until it sort of, really gets integrated. So he had all this time on his hands. So he started organizing down in that basement all those cassettes and VHS and stuff like that. But then likewise, the other thing we had at our disposal is, in the 80s, and if you look at really from Runaway in the early 80s through Slippery When Wet or New Jersey, which is like 88, and that's really like the explosion, like the arriving on the scene. That was like the sort of when MTV and then VH1 really came into being. And so they document, it was all there. It was, all these tours, the 240 tours, the 240 dates that I think Bon Jovi went on for those back-to-back Slippery When Wet and then New Jersey was like all captured, and it was incredible. So 40 years, a mountain of archive, it's great. Now you have to build the team to sort of deal with it. And there's a company called Invenium that helped us organize. John had actually already engaged them to help organize. And that's kind of what they do. And then I built an incredible, archive team. I had an amazing showrunner, et cetera. I mean, again, I get to talk to you and get all this credit and stuff like that, but it's the team, and it's the editors, the producers, the writers, the archives. And then also a lot of it is taking that incredible material and trying to make it come alive. Because, you have John kept so much of his writing, his lyrics, and it's like, that's great, but now how do we elevate that and make it feel like poetry? And, that takes a talented visual artist, etc. So, yeah.
That was beautiful, the way that it was all part of the process. The creative process is such a through
Yeah.
line in every episode, and that's so important for this kind of films. This film would have been like probably impossible to make in terms of like licensing music and archive if it wasn't coming directly from the band, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's something I've definitely discovered. Music, I mean, sports is complicated enough because of all the different leagues and controlling all the rights and stuff like that. But music, I think, is just another level because, there's obviously the recording companies, like the record companies, but then the publishing rights is a whole different thing. And yeah, I mean, and even so, that's complicated. The good news for us was John's pretty much had the same record company his entire career. But then, of course, even then, different, whoever he wrote the music with, Desmond Child, Richie Sambora, et cetera, and others over time, now you have to get their sign off and buy-in and stuff like that. So yeah, music is a whole crazy world, but it certainly helps to have, a guy. And that's, the thing is, John, incredible artist, founder of the band over time, incredible businessman. Like he's, controlled in a good way his art, over time. And so, having one partner really owning a lot of his catalog, driving, the creative process. So, he was the guy to go to when we ran into endless roadblocks.
That's great. But also let's go back to talk about the musicians, because you have these incredible founding members of the band that are part of the story, and then the new members of the band, which are also super generous and in the way they talk about their experience. but again, like the darling is the relationship between Richie, Sambora, and John, because they were this incredible, creative couple. And then there's this departure that really like breaks
Yeah.
both, I think, both of their hearts.
Yeah.
But then you get to talk to Richie, and he's such an important counterpoint, from the beginning in the way that you structure the shows. So tell us a little bit about talking to Richie about being part of the film, and how did you navigate that relationship? Were
Yeah.
they talking to each other, or like did they have?
They correspond, I would say, like they're in touch, and maybe through this process they probably talked more than they had in a couple of years, and they met and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a tragedy sort of baked into the big opus of this film. It wasn't particularly controversial to get Richie, like reached out to him and his manager and stuff like that. And they were open from the start. I think once they started to understand what this was going to be and the look back, and, there's no telling this story without Richie's involvement. So Richie wanted to be involved. So it ended up being two interviews, two real sit downs. One was early on, and it was amazing because I had to. I mean, so the challenge with Richie is tracking him down. He's very elusive, and so he was in the UK doing some stuff, and I had to go out there. But I ended up doing that first interview, in Abbey Studios. So that in of itself was incredible and fun. And that we got a lot. I probably spent 3 to 4 hours with him, and he was all of the above. He was warm and gracious and funny and combative, and crazy and funny. And we really got a lot out of that. But then, as these things go over time, like you start to discover other things, and people aren't necessarily, their versions of what happened isn't lining up necessarily. And so at the end, it had to come around and ask him more questions. And again, that ended up being here in LA, where he lives or has a home. But it was good. And I think, there definitely is like this sort of just tragedy of how it fell apart. But there's also 30 years, more or less, of how amazing it was, and I think that I always wanted this to be a celebration of the band. And of course, then you have to deal with, the fallout and the aftermath and all of that sort of stuff, which frankly is still ongoing in some ways. But I don't think he never really resisted doing anything, and John never resisted the stuff Richie said, and Richie didn't really, they're grown-ups and they're brothers, that I think even underneath the disagreements, et cetera, of how it may have ended, there is a sort of brotherhood and a deep love and an appreciation of what they created together.
Yeah, you can really see that, when you get to see them at the induction of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
And also when there's this beautiful moment where you're asking John, and he's like, I don't think I've gotten over it, his
Yeah.
departure. Like it's been, so many years.
Yeah.
But there's a beautiful moment that you construct when they're both trying their way, like their solo careers, in that very moment where John is going to do the Young Guns soundtrack, and
Yeah.
you have a split screen with both of them,
Yeah.
going about their solo adventures and just really trying to prove themselves as artists
Yeah.
without the other. That I think
Yeah.
is very beautiful and very different than everything else you do in the 4-part series. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I had this incredible editor, partner, creative brother, Alex Trudeau Veriato, and he, a lot of this again is just, my style as a filmmaker is surround yourself with amazing people, whether it's a cinematographer or visual effects director, or in this case, editor, give them space to do what they do best. And so again, I mean, like you described, at that point in time, they go their separate ways. It's not clear if they're ever going to come back together, the band, et cetera. There's definitely dealing with burnout, and they're trying to, they were kids when they started, and they're sort of grown men when this initial breakup happens. And so how do you communicate? And they're trying to sort of find their own voices away from each other. And so how do you communicate that? They're still connected, but they're leading sort of separate lives. And that was just a technique. And there's a lot of this where it's just you're testing, you're trying your things and waiting until, oh yeah, that's going to work. Like, let's do more of that, And so it's all experimentation. It's not particularly scripted. And again, one of the great things, and Hulu has been an amazing partner on this, but it's like when we first were making this, like we had freedom. It was us, and John had given us freedom, and so we were just kind of playing around with these things. There wasn't a deadline. There wasn't there was a budget, but there wasn't really like, oh, it has to be this way. It has to be this many parts. It has to be structured this way. So we were able to really find that language.
The other super crazy cliffhanger that you have in the series is also the story with the manager, when
Yeah.
there is this tension with the band, and like he's been accused of having deals with with narco money. And tell us a little
Not
bit.
just accused, convicted. So.
Convicted, exactly.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of fun. And also like, the way that organically, they continue to work with him, but like there was these tensions that were already happening within the band, and like he was pitting them against each other. And then they let him go. But then he's such a fantastic character in the
Such a
film
great
as
character.
well.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit.
No, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Doc is an amazing character. He was obviously very gracious this time, even considering the circumstances, and gave us some gave us great interview and a lot of stories. I think that's just, it's part of that sort of story of rock and roll. And Doc also had a long history before John. That's in part how he got John, and he sort of sold John on the dream, and then he delivered. Sort of got complicated at the end, and I think part of the natural evolution of things and John's sort of coming into his own, not just as an artist but as a boss, like as a businessman, and Richie too, because I think he had that background, and them sort of seizing control of their own destiny. But some of that stuff, and we really had to like almost, you could do, and I believe someone is doing the Doc McGee doc, and like that entire thing just in the Moscow Peace Festival, which is sort of like all ingrained in that sort of drug conviction and stuff like that. It's its own story, and we had to sort of peel back because it's like, man, like this will just take us in an hour detour. It's not going to make sense for the Bon Jovi story, because that was, a big, huge music festival with a lot of different acts. But yeah, Doc is such a compelling character, and it was amazing to be able to even get that small pieces of his story into this.
I actually love the way that we're going. We're kind of like a little disheartened with John because of the operation, and like how difficult it is to go back to like his top notch, kind of vocal cord status.
Yeah.
But then, you brought us in the last episode to this beautiful recording inside this kind of like a church place where like his voice is brilliant and beautiful and very much like the way we recognize him to be. And it's like such a beautiful like end of the story in many ways. So the story continues, yes, we can continue to do this at the level we wanted to do it. Tell us a little bit about that, like not knowing what was going to happen. Like, did you know? Were you in touch
I
with
mean, I knew because we were obviously tracking, and but I think, and we were able to capture that moment, and it is a special moment, because I think there's also different levels to this. John's quote comeback, there's, can he perform? Yes. Can he record an album? Turns out yes. Can he go out on the road and perform? And that's still TBD. And I've now sat in a bunch of interviews with him and also talked to him, and the thing he keeps on saying is, I can sing, I can do it, I'm doing it. He's done different performances, one-offs here and there, but can I do it for 2.5 hours a night, 4 nights a week, 26 weeks a year? Not yet. And until I can, I'm not committing, because again, the film is full of this. Like, I'm not going to be the fat Elvis. I'm not going to be, 100% of 80%. Like, that's not good enough for me. But I do think that moment of being with the band and being able to, even just in a moment, get to that place was really special. Like, that was enough, at least for us, like for the film. And actually in the moment, it was enough for him and the guys, and there was just joy. And I think that's something he's struggled with for the last, not just 2 years, but 10 years, like just like he says, like voices in his head, and he woke up feeling like, oh no, this is this is who I once was. And that, you know, that was really satisfying and inspiring, I think, and certainly works, I think, in the film. So
Oh my God, like that phrase that you just say, that was who I once was, is
yeah,
exactly what we feel with his smile. The moment
yeah,
that they
yeah,
finish the singing and he turns around, looks at the band and smile,
yeah,
that beautiful smile of his,
yeah,
is like he's 20 years old again. And you can
yeah.
see it's
Desmond Child says it's the $1 billion smile, so that he saw when I think, John was 19 years old or whatever. And here we are. Yeah. I mean, it's a special moment. And that's, look, through all the fame and success and wealth and everything that's come, the ups and downs, I think that's what I was always in pursuit of. And it's earlier we talked about it. It's like there's something mythic about, being an athlete, being an artist, and when you have those moments when you are the best version of yourself, it's special, it's incredible, it's magical. And fortunately along the way we were able to capture a few of those, but I think that was a really meaningful one.
Well, this is unfortunately all the time we have, but thank you so very much, Gotham, for making this great series and bringing us the whole story of the band. And thank you, Hulu, for bringing it to us at home. And thank you, everybody, for watching.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.